Good morning. I'm Margaux Salcedo. Any minute from now, second quarter GDP will be announced. Quarter one growth was at 2.8%, the slowest since 2021, due to soft public spending and high oil prices. For quarter two, analysts expect growth to stay muted. We will bring you live updates as they unfold.
Maria F. Sarto, an assistant
Philippine Statistics Authority is holding its press conference on the quarter two GDP. Let's listen in.
Undersecretary Claire Dennis S. Mapa.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Ang Philippine Statistics Authority mag-uulat ng estado ng ekonomiya ng bansa sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026. Ang Gross Domestic Product o GDP ng Pilipinas ay nagtala ng pagtaas na nasa 2.3% sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026. Ito ay mula sa naitalang 5.4% na pagtaas sa parehong quarter noong nakalipas na taon. Ang Gross National Income o GNI ay nagtala ng pagtaas na nasa 2.2% sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026. Gayon din, ang Net Primary Income from the rest of the world ay tumaas ng 1.0% sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026. Sa Seasonally Adjusted National Accounts para sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026, ang GDP ay nagtala ng quarter-on-quarter na pagtaas na nasa 0.6%. Sa kabilang dako, ang Gross National Income ay nagtala rin ng 0.6% quarter-on-quarter na pagtaas sa parehas na period. Sa tatlong pangunahing sektor ng ekonomiya, ang services at agriculture, forestry and fishing ay nagsipagtala ng pagtaas na nasa 4.5% at 2.7% respectively. Samantala, ang industry sector ay nagtala ng pagbaba na nasa 2.4%. Sa seasonally adjusted GDP, ang agriculture, forestry and fishing ay nagtala ng may pinakamataas na paglago sa mga pangunahing sektor na mayroong 2.7% sa quarter-on-quarter basis. Sunundan ito ng services sector na tumaas ng 1.3%. Samantala, ang industry sector ay nagtala ng pagbaba na nasa 1.8% sa quarter-on-quarter basis. Sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026, ang per capita GDP ay tumaas ng 1.5%. Ito ay mula sa pagtaas na 4.5% sa parehong quarter noong nakalipas na taon. Ang per capita GNI at per capita household final consumption expenditure ay nagsipagtala ng pagtaas na nasa 1.3% at 1.9% respectively. Sa naitalang pagtaas ng GDP na nasa 2.3% sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026, ang services sector ay nagtala ng may pinakamataas na kontribusyon na nasa 2.8 percentage points. Ito ay sinundan ng agriculture, forestry and fishing na nag-ambag ng 0.2 percentage point. Samantala, ang industry sector ay nagtala ng contribution na nasa negative 0.7 percentage point. Sa 16 na sektor ng GDP, ang education sector ay nagtala ng may pinakamataas na paglago na nasa 12.7% sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026. Ito ay sinundan ng mga sumusunod: human health and social work activities na tumaas ng 10.4%, wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles na tumaas ng 4.6%, at public administration and defense, compulsory social security na tumaas ng 4.5%. Ang mga sektor naman na may malalaking kontribusyon sa pagtaas ng GDP sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026 ay ang mga sumusunod: wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, ito ay nag-ambag ng 0.8 percentage point, education na nag-ambag ng 0.6 percentage point, at manufacturing na nag-ambag ng 0.4 percentage point. Sa demand side naman, ang valuables ay nagtala ng may pinakamataas na paglago na mayroong 23.3% sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026. Ito ay sinundan ng mga sumusunod: exports of goods na tumaas ng 17%, government final consumption expenditure, ito ay tumaas ng 8.3%, at exports of services na tumaas naman ng 6.9%. Sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026, ang mga sektor na may malalaking kontribusyon sa pagtaas ng GDP sa expenditure side ay ang mga sumusunod. Household final consumption expenditure, ito ay nag-ambag ng 1.9 percentage points. Government final consumption expenditure, nag-ambag ng 1.5 percentage points. At net exports of goods and services, nag-ambag naman ng 1.2 percentage points. Ang Philippine Statistics Authority ay malugod na nagpapasalamat sa inyong paglahok sa National Accounts Press Conference para sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2026. Salamat at magandang umaga sa ating lahat.
Maraming salamat, Yusek Mapa, para sa ulat ng 2026 second quarter.
And that was the live press conference of the PSA on the quarter 2 GDP. We unpack the latest GDP figure with Domini Velasquez, Chinabank Chief Economist and former Finance Undersecretary. Hello, Yusek. I'm so happy to see you this rainy morning.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Yes, so you're now Chief Economist of Chinabank, but I'd also like to share with our audiences that you're also the Chief Economist of the Department of Finance under then Finance Secretary Ralph Recto.
Correct.
So,
we were together
yes.
during that time.
And as Chief Economist of the Department of Finance, you were also in charge of the Development Budget Coordination Committee, Executive Review, ETB,
Yes.
Executive Technical Board. Yes. Okay. So our GDP went down to 2.3 from 2.8. Your initial thoughts on this?
Disappointing, right? So the consensus was 2.8%. So that's the median consensus. So this 2.3 is lower. We expected slower growth. Remember, 2.8%, that was the start of the crisis. The Middle East crisis started end of February. So that was the brunt is around March to until now, right? So it was really the second quarter. So what we saw as presented by Yusek Mapa was that if we break it down, you'll see household consumption was lower at 2.8%. Sorry, I'm looking at my figures.
Yeah.
At 2.8% compared to last quarter, 3%. That's lower than the usual or historical growth rate of household consumption at 5 to 7%. So that was really a drag. That coincided with your high inflation. Remember, in April, we reached around peak
7.2.
inflation of 7.2%. So that has really been the drag.
However, inflation from the peak of 7.2 in April, it has steadily been going down. It went to 6.4, and then it was just announced earlier this week, it's now at 6.2.
Yeah.
So do you think things will start to look up following this? But I mean, 2.3%, it's really quite low.
So really, it depends on what's happening on the oil prices, right? But because inflation, remember, is a growth figure, right? It's not the level. So the level has gone up. To bring it down, to bring inflation down, the level should go down also. For the rest of the year, our outlook is that it's going to be around 6%, a little bit above 6%. And it's going to go up a little bit on the fourth quarter due to base effects. But hopefully, month on month will be quite steady, maybe a little bit of reversal also.
The Iran war, it's so uncertain. So around 2 months ago, there was the ceasefire. We really thought that things would look up. However, after that, U.S. President Donald Trump said the ceasefire is over. For you as chief economist, how do we deal with this uncertainty?
Well, for us, we've really been dragged by that war, right? So just recently, it looks like they're coming out with a deal. Just this morning, oil prices shot up again because of the draft Strait of Hormuz deal, disallowing, I think, U.S. and Israel ships to pass through. So that's the latest this morning. For us, I think, the government has actually been addressing this, in terms of inflation.
Uplift?
Yes, correct, uplift. In terms of inflation, that's the immediate impact. It's not really GDP. And consumers will feel it when they go to the grocery. They'll know last week prices were a little bit lower as compared to this week, right? So for the government, it's really addressing other inflationary pressures, right? So the subsidy for transport drivers. So I think what they're trying to prevent is an increase in, let's say, jeepney fares or the like, right? Because that will affect everyone. And then it will spiral into people asking for higher wages. So it's really addressing this crisis, which is not going to be, not going to be forever, right? It's really addressing this right now through those programs.
For the GDP, we were expecting it to increase actually because there were proclamations that there has been more government spending. And in fact, it was announced earlier in the press conference that government expenditures increased 8.3%. So why is it still at 2.3 amidst that fact?
Correct. But, well, government spending, so when we say government spending, that's really the PS, the personal services, as you know, right? And MOOE. But what matters, I think, maybe more will be infrastructure spending. I think public construction spending is still down. So if you look at the disbursements figure, Jan to May, that's 42% down. So
That's a big slump.
correct. So when we were estimating, GDP could have increased by 1 percentage point. So for example, now at 2.3, it could be 3.3 if the government has spent like 0% growth on public spending, public construction. So meaning same as last year. It's going to add on another percentage point.
It seems that the strategy of the government now is through devolution. They've been capitalizing on the local government support fund and I guess trying to stimulate the economy by going through the local governments instead for spending. Do you think this is an effective strategy to bring up our GDP?
Yes, I do think that's something that should be prioritized. I know sometimes when we talk about, public spending, we focus on the PWH, we focus on the OTR, but a lot of the finances of the government go to the local governments and they know where to spend, right? So if the local government actually beef up on infrastructure spending, it could compensate for maybe the lagging spending of the national government.
I remember also for Q1, where Secretary RC, I believe, is speaking now at the press conference, but earlier, and I think this continues to this day, one of the factors that brought down GDP was the corruption. And they have said that they are doing government reforms to address this, to bring back investor confidence. What do you think has this contributed? And I guess, is this a reflection that the corruption factor has not been addressed?
All right, maybe I'll move on to the economic side, right? So what happened last year was that this flood control scandal was exposed. So DPWH really, did not spend so much because they were investigating. So that has continued. So third quarter last year up to this second quarter this year, hopefully, the government has been saying that they will catch up again this second half of the year. And that's really important. That's needed. I think the DBM has disbursed most of the money to the infrastructure agency. So it's really on spending these budgetary support.
Do you think that there are other sectors that could help? Manufacturing has been performing really well. We had Secretary Cristina Roque here, and she emphasized and showed that, in fact, exports has been growing consistently for the past 17 months.
Correct.
And at the State of the Nation address, even the President said that we have 23 new free trade agreements or renewed free trade agreements. So do you think this can help bring up our GDP for Q3?
Yes, of course. Right now, if you look at the figures, if you break it down, exports or merchandise exports have actually been growing. We've been benefiting from the AI boom. I know when we talk about semiconductors here in the Philippines, usually we talk about repackaging and I guess lower value added as compared to others. But even though we've been benefiting, exports, I think merchandise exports surprisingly for Jan to June grew by 17%. So that's a big reversal, and that has helped GDP.
That's great. It's a bright spot. And also, surprisingly, agriculture, there's been a lot of investments in irrigation. It's also a priority program of the President. Do you think the agriculture sector could also help boost this? Their performance, I think, has been improving.
The agriculture sector has benefited from favorable weather conditions this first half. I think it should, because not just as a contribution to GDP, but agriculture, most of the lower income, Filipinos are in that sector. So that should actually be supported. So the government is supporting it through, oil subsidies, especially for the fisher folks, for the machinery used in agriculture. However, the outlook for this, we've heard people talk about Super El Nino or the Godzilla of El Nino. So the outlook until 2027 is a little bit bit grimmer than it was maybe in the first half of the year. And I think that should be the one that we're preparing for. DA has actually been preparing for products that are, more sustainable in times of drought. So that's something that we should be, focusing on right now.
Another big factor is the investor confidence. In the last quarter of 2025, people were looking at how investor confidence went down. But it seems that lately, based on the BSP Consumer Confidence Index, it's now neutral at 0,
Yes.
coming from minus 25.2 in May. Meanwhile, that's business confidence. Meanwhile, the consumer confidence actually went down to negative 42%. So what is your take on that, and what is its impact?
I think maybe if we look at business confidence, so they know that this, this war is transitory, this higher oil prices, they think maybe next year would be better. So for that business expectation survey, if you look at 3 months from now, 12 months from now, it's really very, there are more optimists than pessimists. For consumers, I would think that it's really lagging behind because they're receiving the brunt of this crisis, right? They're experiencing high inflation. I mean, if you look at oil prices, it has jumped again this last July, right? I think maybe next week we'll have a rollback. But it has not gone down to what it was before.
Do you think for the consumer confidence, it's also because it shows that the Uplift program or all of these ayuda programs are not really working? Maybe perhaps in terms of a crisis, maybe it was a good move, but really its impact is not that great. And perhaps maybe the tax reforms that the president suggested or demanded at the State of the Nation address would help.
So not so much that it's not working. I'm sure it's working. But, the Ayuda program is really for a very small portion of the population. Those are really for the lower income segment, those who are poor or almost poor. So that's a priority of the government. So, regular people who go to work, who have work, they won't feel that Ayuda program. For us, I guess, the president has heard the call of the middle income class, right? He mentioned that in his SONA. So reducing the tax exemption threshold from 250 to 350. But that's gonna happen maybe next year still.
Oh, there was a statement from the Department of Finance that would set us back by 60 billion pesos.
Correct.
So how do we manage that?
Well, right now, if you know, both of us should know, right? So fiscal deficit has been, we've had fiscal deficits for the year. I think the target is 5.3% of GDP, right? There should be some other measures that should compensate that 60 billion. It could be, I think it has been announced, it could be excise taxes, some kind of wealth tax in terms of, luxury vehicles. So it can't be just a reduction in income tax and then a loss of revenues and then you don't have revenues to add on to that.
The BSP increased rates to by 25 bips to 4.75. Do you think there's more room for that kind of strategy?
So initially, we've been, very dovish on this. We think maybe one more hike, especially with the GDP figure now. We know that the BSP is an inflation targeter, but sometimes, these supply shocks, monetary policy cannot do anything about it, and unless, except anchoring inflation expectations. But in terms of low domestic demand, I don't think there's much room to increase. Maybe another last hike this end of August.
So for our last question, Yusek, bumaba na naman ang ating GDP to 2.3%. Ano pa pwede natin gawin to increase this? What steps or strategies can the government now take to make up for this and hopefully bring this up to this coming third quarter and for the annual quarter and hit their targets of 3.5 to 4.5%? Or who knows, maybe even higher?
So for us, short term. So short term, third quarter, fourth quarter, really prioritizing infrastructure spending, job creation, beefing up tourist arrivals. Tourist arrivals surprisingly has increased in the first half, I think around 5.7%. So that's really short-term measures. Longer-term measures, it's really, moving us up the value chain in terms of AI, of manufacturing. I mean, we've had these initiatives. You mentioned SecCris has a lot of trade agreements lined up. Pax Silica is there. I think when we were both in the government, we prioritized create more, giving incentives for manufacturing companies and other companies to come in here. We have all those. So it's really attracting these investments after this year, and then we'll be good to go.
Good to go. Okay, so hopefully things will start looking up starting today, and we have to continue to hope. Thank you so much, Yusek.
Thank you.
More stories when we return. This is Business 360. Welcome back to Business 360. I'm Margaux Salcedo. A fuel price rollback is projected next week. Based on industry estimates, diesel and gasoline prices may drop by as much as 5 pesos per liter. This comes after crude oil prices slid this week on hopes of a U.S.-Iran deal. Malacanang is leaving the complaints against Health Secretary Jose Brix Pujalte Jr. to the Ombudsman. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro says it's up to the Ombudsman to decide whether Pujalte should be suspended after an anonymous group of health advocates filed a graft complaint. At issue, Pujalte's suspension of a more than 3 billion peso procurement of tuberculosis medicines. The complainants warn the freeze could delay life-saving drugs and trigger a nationwide shortage. But the DOH Secretary defends the DOH's decision and says he is open to any investigation.
I was 2 weeks into my leadership in DOH, and I'm being asked to sign a 3.2 billion contract. So anyone in his right mind would say, pause, let me review this, because due diligence is important, rather than signing something of which, if I did, they would say, but ang bilis mo pinirmahan yan, probably complicit. I don't want that impression. I would rather think that the best thing to do is study something of such enormous amount.
It's the second controversy to hit the DOH secretary, who has also faced separate allegations of gambling barely a month into the job. The Securities and Exchange Commission said it will respond in court when it receives the petition against its new term limit rule. The petition filed by PSE broker directors Eddie Gobing and Vivian Yuchenko seeks to void the rule that limits PSE broker directors to a maximum of 10 years of service. They claim that the term limit rule illegally overrides shareholders' rights to elect their chosen PSE board representatives. The petition also alleges that the SEC circular shows a clear and unexplained bias in favor of foreigners. But the SEC argues the rule was issued under its legal authority to regulate the capital market and promote good corporate governance. It added that the policy aims to improve transparency, accountability, and the integrity of the Philippine capital market. Billions made, billions lost. Forbes Philippines drops its 50 richest list, with ports and casino tycoon Enrique Razon claiming the top spot for the first time. Joel Caballero has that story.
Sports and casino tycoon Enrique Razon Jr. tops the Forbes Philippines 50 richest list for the very first time. He nearly doubled his fortune in a single year to $21.8 billion. That's more than 1.2 trillion pesos. It's the biggest gain on the entire list, enough to knock out the C family out of the top spot for the first time. Razon heads the Philippines' largest port operator, ICTSI, and casino operator, Bloomberry. But zoom out of Razon, and it was a rough year for the richest. The combined wealth of the 50 richest Filipinos fell to $79 billion from $86 billion the year before, dragged down by slow economic growth, the fallout from the Iran war, higher oil prices, and a weaker peso. Forbes says only 14 names on the list were richer than a year ago. The C siblings slipped to second, their fortune down $2.6 billion to $9.2 billion as SM Prime's mall shares fell 18% in a soft property market. San Miguel's Ramon Ang claimed the third spot at $3.5 billion, even as the conglomerate's shares slid on worries over its heavy debt. On the flip side, Pure Gold's Lucio and Susan Koch cracked the top 5 for the first time, thanks to strong supermarket sales and a new push into water utilities. Farther down, another race. Insurance and sports car tycoon Robert Coyito Jr. posted the year's biggest leap, up 14 places, his fortune more than doubling to $925 million. Restaurateur Injapsia climbed 10 spots, Megawide's Edgar Saavedra 7, and mining's Manuel Zamora 6, all riding stronger valuations. Meanwhile, the steepest fall belongs to Manuel Villar. Once the country's richest, he tumbled from 3rd to 9th, roughly $8.5 billion gone. His companies are now under a regulatory cloud, accused of insider trading and market manipulation. One of his flagship stocks was even suspended from trading after the firm cut the value from its prime Manila land. Jollibee's Tony Tan Caktiong dropped out of the top 10 entirely, following a sharp decline in Jollibee shares. Forbes measured these fortunes back in mid-July, and the full list of 50 is out now. Joel Caballero, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
And that's Business 360. I'm Margaux Salcedo. Thank you for joining us. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.